Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. Here's something that should stop you cold. You can have fully approved medical leave on file, follow every single step your employer laid out, show up and do your job, and still get penalized for taking the leave you were legally granted. That's not a hypothetical. Today, we're telling the story of Catherine Rowe Gehring, an Amazon fulfillment and CXO associate whose experience cuts through UPT deductions during approved intermittent leave, retaliatory write-ups, safety misclassifications, and communication tools that simply didn't work. By the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly how these systems are supposed to work, where they broke down, and what it looks like when multiple failures hit one person at the same time. I've got someone here who has dug deep into every layer of this. Let's get into it. Walk me through who Catherine actually is before we get into what happened to her.
So, according to her LinkedIn profile, Catherine Rowe Gehring is based in Palm Springs, California. She worked as a fulfillment associate at Amazon Fulfillment Technologies and Robotics from September 2021 through March 2023, that's about a year and 7 months, out of New Century, Kansas. Before that, she was a package handler at FedEx Ground, and she's currently a CXO retail associate at Amazon Web Services, working within the Whole Foods network in Palm Desert, helping customers with returns and pickups at the retail locker.
So she's been in the logistics and fulfillment world for a while.
Right, and what's interesting is her background isn't just warehouse work. Her LinkedIn shows she studied criminology at Colorado Technical University, theology at Grand Canyon University, and world history at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. She also runs her own investigations firm, Catherine R. Gehring Investigations, which she's owned since 2019. So this is someone with a very specific eye for detail and documentation.
That's a really layered background for someone working a fulfillment floor. And she also lists OSHA safety procedures as part of her FedEx experience specifically.
Exactly, and that matters a lot when we get to the safety incident piece later. But let's start at the beginning, the UPT situation, because that's where things first started going sideways, and it's also the part that most people don't understand until it's already cost them.
Okay, so break it down. What is UPT, and what does intermittent LOA actually mean in this context?
So UPT stands for unpaid time. It's essentially a bank of hours that Amazon workers draw from when they're absent and don't have other paid leave to cover it. Intermittent LOA, or leave of absence, is a type of leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, where instead of taking a big block of time off, you take leave in smaller chunks as needed. The US Department of Labor is very clear that this is a legitimate option for employees with qualifying medical needs.
And the FMLA is federal law, so this isn't optional for employers who meet the size threshold.
Correct. According to the DOL, the FMLA applies to private sector employers with 50 or more employees for at least 20 work weeks in the current or preceding calendar year. And it provides eligible employees up to 12 work weeks of unpaid leave per year. Employers cannot dictate when an employee uses intermittent FMLA leave. As long as the leave is for a qualifying reason, it has to be granted. That's straight from the DOL's FAQ page.
So the law is pretty clear. You have approved leave, you use it, you're protected. What went wrong for Catherine?
Here's where it gets complicated, and honestly, Catherine's situation mirrors something that's been documented publicly. There's a Reddit thread on r/Raw Whole Foods, which is the Amazon-adjacent Whole Foods worker community, where someone posted about the exact same problem. They had approved intermittent leave, used it, and UPT was still being deducted. And the response from TMS, the Team Member Services System, was essentially your leave approval and your UPT protection are two completely separate processes.
Wait, what? So getting the leave approved doesn't automatically protect your UPT balance?
Not automatically, no. According to that TMS response documented on Reddit, workers have to separately submit something called PRTO, Protected Time Off, in Workday, and they have to do it within 30 days of the absence. The TMS message literally says, you have not submitted PRTO in Workday, so UPT will not be returned even if intermittent LTO is listed. And once PRTO is submitted and approved, the UPT deductions reverse, but only within 72 hours of that approval.
So there's a 30-day window that most workers probably don't even know exists.
And if you miss that 30-day window, you need TMS business partner approval to fix it. The TMS response also notes when you report intermittent time to Sedgwick, the third-party leave administrator, you'll see intermittent time off appear in your Workday balances, but that, quote, does not interact with Kronos or UPT deductions. So the leave shows up in one system and does nothing in the system that actually controls your pay.
That is a genuinely confusing system, and I can see how someone navigating a medical situation, which is why they have the leave in the first place, might not catch that distinction.
Exactly. And the Amundsen Davis law firm, which published a detailed breakdown of intermittent FMLA compliance in October 2024, makes the point that employers who suspect leave abuse should proceed cautiously, because even requesting a doctor's note for each absence can constitute interference with legitimate leave use. So the legal standard is actually quite protective of the employee. The operational reality, though, is a different story.
So Catherine is dealing with daily HR and DLS interactions, trying to sort this out, and presumably getting the runaround while her UPT balance is draining.
That's the picture that emerges. And what makes it worse is that this isn't a one-time administrative hiccup. When you're having to engage with HR and the delivery labor systems team every single day just to protect leave you were already approved for, that's a significant operational burden on top of whatever medical situation prompted the leave in the first place.
And then, on top of all of that, there are write-ups happening at KRB4. That's the fulfillment center designation. So she's fighting the leave system and getting disciplined at the same time.
Right. And this is where the retaliation question becomes really important. The California Civil Rights Department, and Catherine is now based in California, has a fact sheet that's very specific about what retaliation looks like. It defines retaliation as when an employer fires, refuses to hire, disciplines, or otherwise punishes someone because that person engaged in a legally protected activity.
And using approved FMLA leave is a legally protected activity.
It is. The CRD fact sheet lays out 3 things you need to prove retaliation. 1, the person did something they had a legal right to do. 2, they experienced work-related harm, an adverse action. And 3, the harm happened at least in part because of that protected activity. A write-up is explicitly listed as a form of adverse action in retaliation documentation guidance.
So the write-ups themselves become evidence in a potential retaliation claim.
Exactly. And the legal guide from Novian and Novian, published in June 2025, is very clear that employee write-ups must be conducted in a manner free from discrimination. They cannot be based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, or any other protected characteristic. The framework that governs this includes the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Civil Rights Act. If write-ups are being issued in close temporal proximity to protected leave use, that timing becomes significant.
And the guidance on documenting retaliation, what does that look like for someone in Catherine's position?
According to the documentation guidance from Legal Clarity, you want to gather pay stubs that show any reduction in hours or wages, the disciplinary notices or write-ups themselves, your offer letter or employment contract, and a copy of the employee handbook, specifically the sections on anti-retaliation policy, grievance procedures, and progressive discipline. That paper trail is everything.
And given that Catherine has an investigations background, she probably understood the documentation piece better than most workers would. That's a fair read. Someone who runs their own investigations firm knows how to build a record.
Now, let's shift to the safety side of this, because the PIT wire guidance miscalculations and the guardrail incident misclassification are a whole separate layer of concern.
Yeah, let's get into that. PIT, that's powered industrial truck, right? Forklifts, pallet jacks, that kind of equipment.
Right. In a fulfillment center context, PITs are the vehicles used to move product around the floor. Wire guidance refers to the embedded wire systems that help guide these vehicles along designated paths. It's a safety and efficiency mechanism. If those calculations are off, you're looking at vehicles operating outside their intended parameters, which creates real physical risk.
And then there's the guardrail incident. What does misclassification mean in that context?
So OSHA has extremely precise standards for guardrail systems under 29 CFR 191029. The top rail has to be 42 inches above the walking surface, plus or minus 3 inches. The mid-rail sits at 21 inches, halfway between the top rail and the floor. The toe board has to be at least 3.5 inches in vertical height. These aren't suggestions, they're federal specifications. And according to Blue Steel Co.'s breakdown of OSHA 191029, a single OSHA citation for getting this wrong can cost $16,131, and that's before any production shutdown costs.
So when an incident involving a guardrail gets misclassified, say labeled as a near miss instead of a recordable incident, Or vice versa, that has real regulatory consequences.
Significant ones. OSHA's framework under 29 CFR 191028 defines when full protection is required. For pits 4 feet or deeper, employers must provide covers, guardrail systems, travel restraints, or personal fall arrest systems. And 191029 defines exactly what those systems have to look like. If an incident happens and it's misclassified, you're potentially hiding a compliance failure from regulators. That's a very different category of problem than a paperwork error.
And the Federal Highway Administration, the FHWA, also maintains guardrail standards, right? Though that's more on the roadway side.
Correct. The FHWA has its own guardrail resources and inspection guidance, including the AASHTO manual for assessing safety hardware. But in a fulfillment center context, OSHA is the governing body. The principle is the same, though. Proper classification and documentation of safety incidents is non-negotiable. The FHWA's own materials describe roadside safety hardware as the last line of defense, and that framing applies equally to industrial guardrails. They exist to prevent serious injury. Misclassifying what happened to one of them undermines the entire safety record.
So we've got leave system failures, retaliatory discipline, and now safety documentation problems. And through all of this, Catherine is also contributing to LPMD, CXO, and VOA planning. That's not a small thing.
No, it's not. Her LinkedIn profile describes her CXO role as emphasizing customer service and operation efficiency within the Whole Foods network. CXO in this context refers to customer experience operations, the retail locker system for returns and pickups. VOA planning, voice of associate, is the internal feedback and planning process that Amazon uses to incorporate associate input into operational decisions. Contributing to that while simultaneously navigating all of these HR and safety issues is a remarkable amount of cognitive load.
It's almost like she was building the house while the foundation was being pulled out from under her.
That's exactly the right image. And it raises a question that the Harvard Program on Negotiation actually addresses directly. Their research, published in June 2026, makes the point that when employees behave in ways that seem disruptive or uncooperative, it's often because they're trying, ineffectively, to express legitimate concerns. The manager's task, they argue, is not to shut the behavior down immediately, but to understand what's driving it. And listening in that way often reveals whether the behavior reflects individual frustration or broader organizational problems.
So the write-ups, from a management perspective, might have been treating the symptom rather than the cause.
That's the argument. And the Harvard Poen piece goes further. It says that effective accountability systems rely on clear expectations, transparent decision-making standards, and appropriate incentives and consequences. Research by UC Berkeley professor Philip Tetlock shows that people make better, less overconfident decisions when they know in advance they'll be held accountable. But accountability works best when it's prospective, not punitive. What Catherine experienced sounds like the punitive version.
Now let's talk about the communication tools piece, KRB4 and SCA4. Because unreliable tools in a high-volume fulfillment environment aren't just annoying, they're operationally dangerous.
Right. And this connects to something the Institute for Change Leadership and Business Transformation published in November 2024. Their research found that without a continuous, agile approach to gathering feedback, organizations risk missing critical signals that could indicate resistance, misalignment, or confusion among employees. And that gap, they're very specific about this, can result in lower morale, decreased productivity, and ultimately the failure of change initiatives.
So when the tools that are supposed to facilitate communication between workers and HR or management are themselves broken, you're not just dealing with inconvenience, you're dealing with a structural breakdown in the feedback loop.
Exactly. And Contact Monkey's 2026 analysis of internal communication tools makes the point that companies using purpose-built internal communication platforms tend to experience higher employee engagement, stronger organizational alignment, and more informed decision-making compared to those with generic communication solutions. The flip side of that is, when the tools don't work, you get the opposite. Disengagement, misalignment, and decisions made without the information needed to make them well.
And in Catherine's case, unreliable tools at KRB4 and SCA4 would have made it harder to escalate the UPT issues, harder to document the safety concerns, harder to flag the write-ups through proper channels.
It compounds everything. Think about it. The UPT reconciliation process alone requires navigating multiple systems. Sedgwick for the leave reporting, Workday for the PRTO submission, Kronos for the time tracking. If any of those communication channels are unreliable, the 30-day window to submit PRTO can slip by before you even realize the deduction happened. And the TMS response documented on Reddit specifically says that once you're past 30 days, you need TMS business partner approval to fix it. So the window is real and the consequences of missing it are real. Completely real. And this is where I think Catherine's story becomes more than just one person's experience. The Reddit thread on Ara Whole Foods shows this is a pattern. Other workers in the same network hitting the same wall. The person who posted that thread said they had learning difficulties and needed things over-explained, and the TMS response they got was a multi-step technical process involving 3 different systems. That's a system that is not designed with the worker in mind.
That's a really important point. The complexity of the process itself becomes a barrier to accessing the protection the process is supposed to provide.
And the Amundsen Davis legal analysis from October 2024 makes a related point. Employers cannot limit when an employee uses intermittent FMLA leave, and they cannot require a doctor's note for each absence. But if the administrative process for protecting that leave is so complex that workers can't navigate it, the practical effect is the same as limiting the leave. The protection exists on paper, but not in practice.
So the law says one thing, the operational reality says another. And the person caught in the middle is the worker.
That's the core tension in Catherine's story. And it's worth noting that the DOL is explicit that FMLA leave is unpaid. The law only requires unpaid leave. So when UPT is being incorrectly deducted during approved intermittent leave, you're not just dealing with an administrative error. You're dealing with a situation where a worker's leave bank is being drained in a way that could ultimately affect their employment status.
Because if your UPT hits 0, that's a termination trigger in a lot of fulfillment center policies.
Precisely. So what looks like a bureaucratic inconvenience is actually a mechanism that, if left uncorrected, can end someone's employment. And if that person is using protected leave when the deductions happen, and if write-ups are also accumulating during that same period, you have a situation where the legal protections are being undermined by the operational systems that are supposed to implement them.
Let me ask you something that I think is the harder question here. Is this a case of bad actors, or is it a case of bad systems?
That's the right question. And honestly, the answer is probably both, but in different proportions than people assume. The UPT and PRTO disconnect looks more like a system design failure than individual malice. The fact that Sedgwick, Workday, and Kronos don't talk to each other in a way that automatically protects workers who have approved leave, that's an architectural problem. But the write-ups, those involve human decisions. And the California Civil Rights Department is very clear that proving retaliation requires showing the harm happened at least in part because of the protected activity. That's a human decision chain.
So the system creates the conditions, and then individual decisions either exploit those conditions or don't.
That's a good way to put it. And the Harvard Poen research is useful here too. It notes that leaders sometimes focus too narrowly on the individual and overlook the organizational structures that helped create the problem. One frequent culprit they identify is the absence of clear accountability. If the system doesn't hold anyone accountable for incorrect UPT deductions or for write-ups issued during protected leave periods, the behavior continues.
And the safety misclassification piece, the guardrail incident, that one feels like it could go either way too.
It does. Misclassifying a safety incident can happen because someone doesn't understand the OSHA standards, which are genuinely complex. Under 29 CFR 191029, the guardrail requirements are very specific, and as Blue Steel Co.'s analysis notes, the old 191022 language is still widely quoted online, which creates confusion during compliance audits. So there's a real possibility of genuine misunderstanding, but there's also a possibility of deliberate misclassification to avoid a recordable incident on the facility's safety record. Those are very different things with very different legal implications.
And Catherine, with her OSHA background from FedEx, would have known the difference.
Her LinkedIn specifically mentions extensive OSHA safety procedures as part of her FedEx experience. So yes, she would have had the knowledge to recognize when a classification was wrong. And that knowledge, combined with her investigations background, means she was probably not going to let it go quietly.
which might explain some of the friction with management.
It's a reasonable inference. Someone who knows the standards, documents carefully, and pushes back on incorrect classifications is going to create friction in an environment that isn't used to that level of scrutiny from a floor-level associate. And the CRD fact sheet is very clear that speaking out against a practice you reasonably believe is illegal is a legally protected activity. So if Catherine was flagging the safety misclassification, that's protected speech.
And then getting written up after flagging it would be textbook retaliation under the CRD's definition.
Under the three-part test, protected activity, adverse action, causal connection, yes, that would fit the definition. The CRD examples include things like taking someone off the schedule because they encouraged a colleague to request reasonable accommodations, or excluding someone from professional development because they spoke out against discrimination. The pattern is protected activity followed by punishment.
I want to come back to the CXO and VOA contribution piece for a second, because I think it's easy to lose sight of it in all of this. She's not just a worker being ground down by the system. She's actively contributing to how the operation runs.
And that's what makes the story so striking. Her LinkedIn describes her CXO role as emphasizing customer service and operation efficiency. VOA, Voice of Associate, is specifically designed to capture associate input and feed it into operational planning. So Catherine is simultaneously being penalized by the system and contributing to improving it. That's a profound contradiction.
It's like being asked to help design the building while someone else is filing paperwork to have you removed from the construction site.
That's exactly it. And the Contact Monkey research on internal communication tools makes a point that's relevant here. Organizations that use purpose-built platforms experience higher employee engagement and more informed decision-making. The VOA process is supposed to be that mechanism. But if the communication tools at KRB4 and SCA4 are unreliable, the VOA input Catherine is providing may not even be reaching the people who need to act on it.
So her contributions might be getting lost in the same broken system that's failing to protect her leave.
That's the real possibility. And the ICLBT research from 2024 is very direct about this. Without a continuous, agile approach to gathering feedback, organizations risk missing critical signals. Those signals could be about safety, about leave administration failures, about morale. When the tools don't work, all of those signals get lost.
So when you step back from everything we've covered, the UPT deductions, the HR and DLS interactions, the write-ups, the safety misclassification, the broken communication tools, what does this really come down to?
It comes down to a gap between what the law promises and what the operational reality delivers. The FMLA is a strong law. The DOL's protections are real. OSHA's standards are specific and enforceable. California's anti-retaliation protections are among the strongest in the country. But all of those protections require workers to navigate complex multi-system processes perfectly, often while dealing with the very medical or workplace conditions that prompted the protections in the first place.
And Catherine's story shows what happens when someone doesn't navigate it perfectly, not because they didn't try, but because the system made it nearly impossible to get it right.
And what's important to hold on to is that she kept going. She moved from fulfillment into CXO retail. She's contributing to VOA planning. She's still in the Amazon network. That's not someone who gave up. That's someone who kept building, even when the system was working against her.
Here's what I keep coming back to. The Reddit post from the R Whole Foods worker who said they had learning difficulties and needed things over-explained, and the response they got was a multi-step technical process across 3 different systems. That's the system in miniature. It's not designed for the people it's supposed to serve.
And the Amundsen-Davis analysis from October 2024 puts it, well, intermittent leave can pose logistical issues for employers. But the law is clear that those logistical issues cannot become the worker's problem to solve alone. Employers have obligations. The question is whether the systems they build actually fulfill those obligations or just create the appearance of fulfilling them.
Appearance versus reality. That's the thread running through all of this.
Approved leave that doesn't actually protect your UPT. Write-ups that look like performance management but function as retaliation. Safety classifications that look like compliance but obscure what actually happened. Communication tools that look like feedback channels but don't reliably transmit the feedback. At every level, the appearance of a functioning system and the reality of that system are different things.
And the people who pay the price for that gap are the ones on the floor.
Always. The Harvard Poen research makes the point that behavior that looks disruptive often reflects legitimate concerns and broader organizational problems. Catherine's story is a case study in what those broader organizational problems look like when they stack up on one person at the same time.
So here's what I want listeners to take away from this. If you're a worker navigating intermittent leave, know that your leave approval and your pay protection are two separate processes. The DOL is clear on your rights, but the operational steps to exercise those rights are on you to execute, and the window is 30 days. Document everything. Gather your pay stubs, your write-ups, your offer letter, your employee handbook. That paper trail is your protection.
And if you're in a management or HR role, the Harvard Poen research and the ICLBT findings both point to the same thing. The absence of clear accountability and reliable feedback loops doesn't just hurt workers, it hurts the organization. When you miss the signals that Catherine was sending, you lose the operational insight she was contributing through VOA planning. You can't have it both ways.
We started this episode with a question that should have felt impossible. How do you get penalized for using leave you were legally approved to take? Catherine Rowe-Garing's story answers that question in painful detail. The law is on the worker's side. The systems, too often, are not. And the distance between those two things is where people like Catherine live every single day. Thanks for being here for this one on Copilot Podcasts. This story matters, and now you know why.